Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story. Story number 1. On a dry stretch of interstate that cut through the desert like a black ribbon, a trucker named Mark Reeves guided his rig through the small hours of the night. The dashboard glowed soft green, the engine hummed under his feet, and outside his windshield there was nothing but darkness and the faint silver outline of low, distant hills. He had been driving long enough to know the rhythms of the road, the way the world changed after midnight. Towns emptied, headlights thinned, and the sky seemed heavier. He liked it that way. Fewer car, fewer distraction. Just him, the highway, and the steady tick of the clock on the dash. The CB radio crackled quietly on channel 19, mostly just static and the occasional distant voice. Mark kept it low. A familiar background noise. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the taste, and checked his mirrors. Trailer steady, lines straight. Nothing behind him but a thin spray of dust. A sign slid past on the right. Next service is 61 miles. He had planned to stop at the rest area about 20 miles ahead, a lonely pull-off with a handful of parking spots and a row of vending machines that looked older than his oldest route. It wasn't much, but it was a place to stretch his legs and write down his last entry before pushing on to the morning. The CB hissed again, then fell silent. Then a voice came through. Clear. Calm. Too calm. Breaker 1 to 9. Any drivers near mile marker? 317? Mark glanced at the radio, surprised at how sharp the voice sounded. No background noise, no engine whine, just a flat, almost empty tone. He flicked a glance at his GPS. He was approaching mile marker 298. Not far. Another pause. Static rolled in and out, like waves on gravel. Any drivers by 317 come back. There was something about the way the caller repeated the numbers. Slow, careful, like someone reciting them from a piece of paper. Mark reached for the mic without thinking. Habit. This is northbound on I-40, about mile 298. Go ahead, driver. Silence. The radio was alive, the green light steady. Static lapped against the edges of the channel, but the voice didn't return. Mark waited another 30 seconds, eyes on the dark road, fingers lightly touching the wheel. Nothing. Must have dropped out of range, he muttered to himself, setting the mic back in its cradle. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly to either side, broken only by the occasional scrub and the suggestion of dry riverbeds. The sky overhead was moonless, a thick velvet black that swallowed the stars. His headlights carved out a narrow cone of pale yellow ahead. Beyond that, the world simply did not exist. He checked the dash clock. 2:41 a.m. The minutes crawled. The mile markers ticked past. 299. 300. 301. The voice came back. Northbound driver, you still there? Mark's hand moved even before he realized it. He picked up the mic again. Copy that, I'm still here. What's going on at 317? Another stretch of silence, long enough that he almost thought the call had dropped again. Then, very faintly, need a hand out here. The way the caller said hand made the hair along Mark's arms lift. Not the words themselves, but the flatness behind them, like they'd been emptied of feeling and set back in place. He cleared his throat. You broke down or what? You got flares out? Static. A faint dry crackle, like someone rubbing sandpaper together. Can't leave the truck, the voice said. Can you stop? By 317. Don't pass it. There was no urgency, no frustration. A normal driver with a breakdown would sound annoyed, tired, maybe worried. This sounded like someone reading instructions off a card. Mark frowned. You got a handle, driver? Company? I'll give dispatch a heads up when I get a signal. Silence stretched again. The CB light held its steady glow. Then, slowly, like someone deciding on a name, call me Ben. Mark waited for more. Company name, truck color, something. Nothing else came. I'll see what I can do, Ben, he said at last, uneasy. If I see you at 317, I'll pull in. He set the mic down, thumb tapping lightly against the steering wheel. He didn't like the way his chest felt, a low, restless tightness. Mile marker 310 slipped past on his right. The desert seemed even emptier now, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for something. The distant hills melted into indistinct lumps in the dark. The air felt too still, too clear. He reached for the radio again, intending to switch channels, maybe catch a more normal conversation, but the device crackled softly, and the same voice returned. "Don't miss it," Ben said, a shade louder than before. 317. That's where it is. Mark hesitated. "Where what is, driver?" The answer came right away this time. The turn. He stared at the CB, then back at the road. "There's no turn at 317. Just a rest area a ways past that." Ben's reply was calm, almost patient. "There's a turn. It's there tonight." Something cold slid slowly down the center of Mark's spine. He drove in silence, letting the miles carry him forward. His mind went through the possibilities. Another driver having some fun on the air. Someone bored and messing with late-night traffic. A local, with a base station, spinning a story. It was possible. Likely, even. But the way the air felt in the cab, dense and too quiet, didn't feel like the usual kind of joke. The dash clock read 3:12 a.m. He glanced at his GPS map. The thin blue line of his route slithered straight ahead, uninterrupted. No upcoming exits, no side roads, nothing but the promised rest area 10 miles up. The display didn't feel comforting. It felt blind. Mile marker 316 gleamed briefly in his headlights, then was gone. 317 was next. The voice on the CB did not return. The road ahead looked the same as it always did, a dark, gently curving ribbon. But as the marker approached, Mark noticed something strange at the edge of his light. A pale shape, low to the ground, on the right side of the shoulder. He squinted, leaning forward slightly. As he passed the mile marker itself, a white post flashing by on his right, his beams fell across an old-style wooden sign planted just beyond it. Faded paint. A simple arrow pointing down a narrow strip of cracked pavement that peeled away into the darkness. The words were only visible for a heartbeat, but they were clear. County Road 17, rest area. Mark's fingers tightened around the wheel. That sign wasn't supposed to be there. He knew this stretch. The next rest area was straight ahead, not down some forgotten side road. His GPS didn't show a county road either. The screen stayed blank where his headlights had picked out the turnoff. His eyes flicked to the mirror. The sign was gone in the red glow of his taillights. The narrow side road he thought he'd seen was swallowed by shadow. For a few seconds, he wondered if he'd imagined it. A trick of tired eyes and long hours. He could keep going. Push past it. Reach the familiar rest area up the line, park among other trucks under buzzing sodium lights, and laugh this off in the morning. The CB radio crackled one more time. "Don't pass it." The words were firm now, less distant, as if whoever owned that voice had stepped closer to the mic. As if he were in the cab, Mark stared straight ahead. His heart thudded slowly, too loudly in his ears. Without quite meaning to, he let his foot ease off the accelerator. The rig slowed. The dark pressed closer around the windshield. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, the idea of ignoring the voice, of sailing right past that unseen side road felt wrong. Not like he was defying a stranger on the radio, but like he was breaking some old quiet rule he didn't remember learning. When the cracked outline of the turn appeared again in his low beams, he'd already made up his mind before he realized it. He checked his mirror, no headlights behind him, for miles clicked on his turn signal out of habit, and let the rig gently roll onto the narrow, faded asphalt. The moment his wheels left the main interstate, the hum of the road changed. The steady, modern drone became a rougher, older sound, like driving over an abandoned parking lot. The steering wheel trembled faintly in his hands. The desert around him seemed to step closer. The sky felt lower. The darkness on either side of the truck was suddenly thick, almost textured, like heavy curtains. He drove carefully, no more than 25, watching the dim twin tracks of worn asphalt stretch ahead. His GPS stopped moving. The blue arrow that represented his rig froze in place, still hugging the interstate, even though he had clearly turned off. The digital map jittered once, then stilled. No recalculating, no warning chimes. Just a quiet, unmoving screen. He tapped the side of the unit with 2 fingers, but nothing changed. The CB remained silent. The narrow road curved gently to the right, then to the left. No signs, no reflectors, no paint. Just broken pavement and darkness. The truck's headlights picked up low scrub, a scattering of rocks, and once, a pale fence post with no fence attached. His dash clock read Trays, 17, Ami. The numbers glowed softly, steady and calm. The road ended abruptly at a small, cracked loop of pavement. Ahead, a low cinder block building crouched alone in the middle of the desert, its roofline jagged and uneven. A dead rest area, the older kind, with no gas pumps, just a few overgrown picnic tables, and a row of restrooms with steel doors. There were no other vehicles, no vending machines humming, no buzzing sodium lights. Yet the place was not completely dark. A single fluorescent tube over the restroom entrance cast a painful, bluish-white glow across the concrete walkway. The light flickered at random intervals, not in a steady stutter but in strange, arrhythmic pulses, as if someone unseen were flipping the switch on and off. Mark eased his rig into one of the striped spaces designed for trucks, unused for who knew how long. His tires crackled over wind-blown sand and old leaves. He set the brake, listened to the hiss, and then turned off the engine. Silence crashed in. It was the kind of silence that had a shape. It filled every corner of the cab, pressed against the glass, seeped into the seams of the doors. No insects, no distant engines, not even the wind. The fluorescent tube hummed faintly outside, its flickers casting long, soft-edged shadows that slid back and forth across the parking area. He sat there with his hands still on the wheel, breathing slow and shallow. The dash clock read 3:17 a.m. He watched the seconds tick. 3:17, 3:17, 3:17. The colon between the numbers blinked, but the minutes never moved. Mark blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. 3:17 a.m. He checked his phone. No signal. The lock screen showed the same time. 3:17. He held his breath and counted in his head, slow and steady, up to 60. When he looked back at the phone, the numbers had not changed. A low unease settled in the back of his throat. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the familiar click somehow too loud in the small, silent space. He cracked the driver's window an inch. The air that slid in was dry and a few degrees cooler than the cab, carrying the faint, stale scent of old concrete and dust. No sounds came with it. He reached for the CB, more for comfort than out of any real hope. "Driver named Ben? You out here somewhere?" he said, keeping his voice even. The reply came at once. "Right here." The voice did not come from the radio. It came from outside, low and clear, barely muffled by the thin door of the cab. As if someone stood just beneath his open window, looking up. Mark's heart slammed once against his ribs. He turned his head slowly. Through the narrow gap in the glass, he saw only the empty parking loop, lit in that harsh, flickering white. No figure, no shadow out of place. He swallowed. "Where's your truck, Ben?" There was a faint pause, like someone considering the question. "Been here a long time," the voice said. It was hard to tell where it came from now. It wasn't quite outside, not quite inside. It seemed to come from the air around him, thin and calm. "You followed the turn. Not everyone does." He forced his fingers to unclench from the wheel. "Look, if you need a ride to the next town, I can call someone when I get a signal, but I'm not—" "You should get out," the voice suggested, polite as a store clerk. "Stretch your legs. You don't want to fall asleep at the wheel." The cab felt smaller with every passing second. The narrow bunk behind him, the drawn curtain, the faint smell of coffee, and old upholstery. His eyes drifted to the side mirror. For a moment, he saw nothing but the pale concrete of the lot and the wavering band of fluorescent light. Then, at the edge of the mirror's curve, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. Another truck. It sat 3 spaces over, where there had been nothing but emptiness when he'd pulled in. An older model, square-nosed, with a faded white cab and a trailer whose paint had peeled in great flakes, revealing dull metal underneath. Its windows were dark, No marker lights glowed. No engine ticked. He hadn't heard it arrive. The air in his lungs moved in shallow drafts. "Is that you over there, Ben?" he asked, though the answer didn't really matter. "Been here a long time," the voice repeated softly. "Lot of nights, lot of drivers. Some stop, some don't." The dash clock still read 3:17 a.m. Mark stared at the unmoving numbers and knew, with a kind of quiet dread, that he had crossed into a place that did not quite belong to the normal road anymore. The rest area felt like something left behind, caught between exits. A pocket of time where things could wait and wait and wait. Behind the curtain of his sleeper, something made a small, deliberate sound. A gentle knock, 2 fingers tapping lightly against the thin panel from the inside. He hadn't brought anyone with him. He never did. The sound came again. Tap, tap. He did not turn around. His muscles locked. His eyes stayed fixed on the windshield, on the cracked pavement, and the ghostly truck across the lot. "Who else is here?" he asked, his voice little more than a dry whisper. The answer drifted through the cab like a draft. Everyone who followed the turn. He listened. Slowly, his ears began to pick up other sounds beneath the silence. Soft, muffled movements, as if people were shifting in sleepers they hadn't climbed into in years. A cough, thin and dry. The click of a lighter that never quite caught a flame. A snatch of murmured conversation in a language he didn't recognize. All of it distant, blurred, but present. The lot was empty. But the lot was not empty. The fluorescent tube overhead flickered harder now, the pulses of light snapping across the asphalt in ragged intervals. With each brief bright flare, the shapes of the picnic tables seemed to lurch slightly, as if they'd been inching forward in the dark and had been caught mid-step. The knock from the sleeper came a third time. Tap, tap. Then a voice, small and close, and not coming from the CB, spoke directly behind his seat. "You gonna let us ride along?" Mark closed his eyes. The voice was not cruel. It was not menacing. It sounded tired, eager, in a quiet, careful way. Like someone who had been standing by the side of the road for far too long, arm out, thumb raised, waiting for a driver who would never stop. He thought of all the stories traded at truck stop counters. Vanished rigs. Drivers who took a wrong turn and were never seen again. Washed out bridges. Night storms. Bad luck. What if some of them had simply gone where he was now? Not gone off the map exactly, but slid into a crack beside it. The CB crackled, startled back into life. For the first time, another voice joined the channel, rough-edged, normal, the way he was used to hearing. "Northbound by 3:30. Watch your speed, boys. Troopers thick out here." "Anyone copy?" The sound was like a rope tossed down into the dark. Mark's hand shot out and grabbed the mic. "Copy. Copy, this is northbound at a..." He faltered, glancing at the dead GPS. Then at the clock that still read 3:17. "At 3:17. Anyone reading this?" Loud and clear, driver," the stranger replied. "You out on 40? Ain't no 317 on my end." The lot soundscape shivered, like a film frame about to splice. The muffled movements in the invisible trucks grew restless. The gentle taps at his sleeper became a hurried flutter, hands searching for a handle that wasn't there. "You hear that?" the soft voice behind his seat asked. "Roads moving on without you. Lights going by." Mark swallowed hard. His throat felt raw. "I have to go," he said, more to the unseen voices in his cab than to the man on the CB. "I can't stay here." "It's quiet here," Ben said, his tone still mild. "Always 3:17. You don't get tired. You don't get older. You don't miss your turns anymore." Mark pictured the interstate, flowing on in his absence. Other trucks, other drivers, cruising past a spot of unbroken desert with no sign, no exit, no rest area. Never suspecting that, one thin layer away, a forgotten loop of pavement and a cinder block building waited with its fixed, artificial light. He put the mic to his lips. "You still there, driver, at 3:30? "Still here. You okay, bud? You sound off." Mark broke off, feeling the thin air of the lot pull at his words. He tried again. "I took a wrong turn. GPS cut out. Got wrapped up in some old rest area, I think. A closed one. Trying to get back on 40. You see any side roads up ahead?" Some kind of old county turnoff? The other driver hesitated. Been pretty straight for the last 50. No side roads. No rest area since 280. And that one's shut down for construction. Where'd you say you were again? Mark looked at the dead map. At the unmoving clock. Something moved in the mirror. The ghostly truck 3 spaces over had changed. Its trailer door, which had been closed a moment before, now yawned open into darkness. A suggestion of shapes clustered just inside, as if something waited at the threshold. The taps behind his seat turned into a slow, deliberate dragging sound, like fingers tracing along the thin vinyl. He tightened his grip on the mic. "Doesn't matter," he said suddenly, firmly. "Just keep talking. Count mile markers as you pass them." Out loud. The other driver gave a low, uncertain chuckle. "You got it, man. Passing 320 now. 321 coming up." The numbers rolled into the air, one after another. With each one, the rest area seemed to flicker. For an instant, Mark saw the same cracked loop of pavement, as it might look at midday, sun-baked and empty, the building tagged with faded graffiti, the fluorescent tube long ago broken. Then, with the next heartbeat, the ghostly light would snap back on, and the parking spaces would fill again with the suggestive shapes of trucks that didn't make sound. 322. 323. The clock on his dash blinked hard. 3:17分. 3:18分. The small change felt like a door slamming somewhere far away. The pressure in the cab shifted. The stale, still air shivered, then began to move, cooling slightly against his skin. A faint wind brushed across the windshield, carrying with it the first normal sound he had heard since he'd pulled off, the distant rush of highway traffic. Behind his seat, all the subtle sounds stopped at once. No tapping, no careful tracing of fingers, just a silence that felt deeply, deeply disappointed. "Don't go," the soft voice said, for the first time holding a hint of emotion. Not anger, not threat, just an almost childlike plea. "You could stay. Keep us company. You followed the turn. That's the rule." Mark forced himself to turn his head, just enough to see the edge of the sleeper curtain. It hung motionless, not even trembling. "I can't," he answered quietly. "Not tonight." The fluorescent tube over the walkway buzzed louder, flared white, and then, in a sharp pop that echoed too loudly, went out. Darkness slammed into the lot. For a heartbeat, his headlights were the only lights in existence. 324. The other driver on the CB continued, unaware. 325. Getting closer to 330. "You still with me, man?" Mark started his engine with hands that trembled only slightly. The familiar rumble rolled back through the floor of the cab, rich and grounding. He released the brake. The soft hiss sounded like a sigh of relief. He eased the rig forward. The cracked pavement vibrated under his tires. As he swung the arc of his headlights across the lot, he checked the space 3 trucks over. It was empty. No old square-nosed rig. No open trailer door. Just bare, dusty concrete. He guided the truck back the way he'd come, following the faint twin tracks of worn asphalt. Behind him, the darkness pressed closer. But with each yard he put between himself and the rest area, the feeling of being watched faded by a hair's breadth. "Still here," he told the driver on the radio. "Keep going. Tell me when you hit 330. "Sure thing. 326. You got me curious, man. You'll have to tell me this story at the next truck stop." The side road wound in a slow S-curve. Ahead, the distant, comforting glow of highway lights began to bleed into the sky, faint but growing. The hum of passing vehicles filtered in, no longer imagined. His GPS beeped once and stuttered back to life. The blue arrow jerked away from its frozen place and caught up in a blur, snapping neatly onto the interstate. Recalculating, the voice sounded normal, annoyingly normal. He reached the end of the old road and rolled up to the merge. For a second, his headlights caught the edge of the highway shoulder and the slim, familiar form of the mile marker there. 317. He turned onto the interstate, his rig fitting back into the wide, smooth lanes like it had never left. A pair of headlights swept past in the left lane, then another. The ordinary world of late-night trucking rushed around him again. 330, the other driver said on the CB. "Right on the nose." "Where you at now?" Mark glanced in his mirror. The place where he'd turned off barely looked like a road at all anymore. Just a patch of darker sand and scattered rocks. No signpost. No cinder block building. No flickering fluorescent light. Just open desert. "Back on 40, he said finally. Guess I must have imagined it. The words felt weak, but they were easier than the truth. He drove in silence for a while, letting the miles smooth the sharp edges of what had just happened. The dash clock ticked forward with small, natural jumps. 3:24. 3:31. 3:46. When he finally pulled into the official rest area, the one listed on his route, with bright signs and modern lights, and a handful of trucks already parked in neat rows, he almost laughed at how plain it looked. He set his brake, shut down the engine, and sat for a moment, listening to the blend of distant engines, low conversations between drivers on the sidewalk, and the familiar hum of vending machines. Normal sounds. His CB hissed softly. Another driver's voice broke through, casual and unremarkable, chatting about weather up north. Mark's eyes drifted to the radio. The channel display, tucked just above the speaker grill, showed a small, glowing number. Certi. He hadn't changed channels. He hadn't moved that dial once since the start of his shift. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between static, a thin, almost inaudible whisper threaded through. "Next time, don't miss the turn." He reached out and firmly twisted the dial to a different channel, listening until nothing remained but the ordinary, mundane traffic of the road. That night, as he lay in his sleeper with the curtain drawn tight, he could not say for certain if he ever truly fell asleep. But at some point, surrounded by the living sounds of an ordinary rest area, he drifted close enough to dreams that the steady ticking of time returned to normal. Far behind him, in a strip of desert no map marked, a forgotten rest area sat under a sky with no moon. Its lone fluorescent tube flickered on again, humming with a borrowed light. One by one, trucks eased silently into its painted spots, engines that did not make sound parking in neat, patient lines. Inside one of them, in a cab that hadn't moved in years, a driver named Ben watched the road that never appeared and listened for the distant echo of a voice that had almost stayed. Story number 2. On a fog-heavy stretch of interstate that wound through low Appalachian hills, a driver named Dave Keller eased his rig along the slow lane and watched the world shrink down to the reach of his headlights. He had driven this route more times than he could count. He knew the faded billboards, the crooked exit signs, and the long climbs by feel. The road here always seemed to brood a little, even in daylight. At night, in the thick white fog that rolled down from the hills, it felt closer still. The dash clock glowed quietly, 2:04 a.m. Outside, the air was a milky gray wall. The beam of his headlights clawed only a few truck lengths ahead before being swallowed. The white lane lines slid by, one after another, steady and hypnotic. Up ahead, a rectangular green sign emerged from the fog like a ship's hull. "Way station 1 mile. All trucks next, right?" Dave frowned faintly. "Open?" he muttered to himself. The way station on this side of the state had been closed for as long as he'd been running the route. Orange barrels, plywood over the windows, an old, faded, closed banner chained to the overpass rail. Drivers mentioned it now and then on the radio, a landmark, and nothing more. As he rolled closer, another sign appeared, this one smaller, set low to the ground. "Way station open. Prepare to stop." Amber lights along its top flashed slowly, their glow smeared and doubled by the fog. The CB on his dash was quiet. No one complaining about the surprise opening. No warnings. Just soft static. The pavement under his tires changed tone as he crossed a bridge. To his right, somewhere out in the dark, a valley opened, filled with invisible trees and invisible houses. He could feel the emptiness there, a hollow space beneath the fog. The next sign came up fast. "Way station, 1/4 mile. All trucks must exit." The word "must" had been added in smaller letters, reflective paint newer than the rest. Dave flicked a glance at his gauges, then at the rearview mirrors. His trailer rode straight. Weight felt right. Logbook was clean. He had nothing to worry about. Still, a tightness settled just behind his ribs. The amber lights along the shoulder came into view first, floating shapes that gradually resolved into tall, thin lampposts marking the ramp. The fog here seemed thicker, swirling in slow spirals around the beams of light, giving everything a soft, underwater glow. He put on his signal and guided the rig onto the exit. The sound of the highway faded immediately, muffled by the fog and the low hills. The ramp curved gently down and to the right, leading toward a dark cluster of buildings and concrete lanes. He expected to see the same shuttered station he always remembered. Plywood on the windows, weeds pushing up through cracked asphalt, a sense of long abandonment. Instead, the way station looked alive. The main building's windows glowed a warm yellow. The big overhead lights over the scale lanes shone white and clear, turning the fog into a shifting silver curtain. The digital sign above the first lane blinked. All trucks, pull forward, idle low. He rolled to a crawl, tension riding his shoulders. Must have reopened it, he said under his breath, though he hadn't heard any talk about it. These things didn't just quietly happen, drivers always knew. He stopped when the red light over his lane told him to stop. The scale platform stretched beneath him, a faint vibration coming up through the floor as hidden sensors woke. For a moment, there was only the soft hiss of his air system and the gentle tick of the dash fan. Then a voice came, from the speaker on the metal post at his window. Calm, neutral. A man's voice, with that particular measured tone of someone who had said the same lines thousands of times. Good morning, driver. Please set brake and bring paperwork inside. Dave blinked at the speaker. He was used to remote way systems, automated messages, or cameras scanning his plates. But this place sounded old-fashioned, like a scene from stories the older drivers told about how things used to be run. He set the brake. The familiar sigh of air valves echoed off the concrete barriers. Then he gathered his logbook, bill of lading, and registration into a neat stack. The fog pressed against the side of the cab. The building's entrance, just ahead and to the right, was a rectangle of yellow light in the gray. He stepped down from the truck. The air wrapped around him at once, cold and damp, carrying the faint smell of wet pavement and long-ago spilled diesel. The world beyond the glow of the station was just featureless white. The building's door bore a simple sign, Inspection Office. The letters were slightly faded, paint worn at the edges. Through the glass, he could see a long counter, a few desks, and a bulletin board covered with papers that had browned at the edges. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air was warmer and dry, with that particular smell shared by old offices everywhere. Paper, dust, and coffee that had stained surfaces more than it had been drunk. Behind the counter stood a man in a light brown uniform shirt with a state crest on the shoulder. His hair was thinning on top, combed carefully. His name tag, brass and polished, read, Harris. He looked up as Dave entered and offered a small, practiced smile. How you doing tonight, driver? Dave nodded, moving to the counter. Doing all right. Surprised to see this place open. Harris's smile twitched, just slightly. We're open when we're needed. Paperwork, please. Dave handed over the stack. The inspector took it with careful fingers, his nails trimmed short and clean. Up close. The uniform looked a little out of date. The cut of the shirt, the style of the badge, even the faded shade of the state patch seemed a few years behind what Dave was used to seeing. Harris flipped through the logbook with quick, experienced glances. His eyes were a pale gray, sharp, and clear. The office around them hummed softly old fluorescent tubes overhead, a faint, distant fan. No computer screens glowed. Instead, a row of older monitors sat dark along the far wall, thick as old televisions. A large analog clock hung above the doorway to a back room. The face was yellowed slightly. The black hands pointed to 2-7. The second hand moved, but not quite smoothly. It seemed to tick in tiny, hesitant jumps, sometimes pausing and then darting forward to catch up. Long haul? Harris asked, making a quick note on a pad of paper rather than a screen. Midwest to the coast, Dave answered. Done it a few years now. The inspector's eyes moved down the log pages. You came through this way? Last winter? Dave shook his head. Ran a southern route last winter. You sure? Harris's voice stayed mild, but there was a peculiar interest in it now. Road remembers you. Dave frowned slightly. Pretty sure I'd remember coming through here with this place open. Last I saw, you all were still boarded up. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered all at once, dimming the room for the span of a breath. In that half-second of lowered light, the office's true shape seemed to bleed through. The neatly stacked forms on the counter looked like they'd melted at their edges long ago, stiff from water damage. The bulletin board's papers were curled and nearly colorless, The far wall bore a dark, uneven stain running down from the ceiling to the floor. Then the lights steadied again, bright and humming, and everything was neat and orderly once more. Harris didn't react. He finished his note and looked up. "You've been on this hill before," he said. Not a question, this time. Fog just like this, night just like this. You came through, didn't stop, kept going. An uneasiness slid between Dave's shoulder blades. "I don't think so." Harris watched him for a long second, then let it go with a small shrug. "Maybe I'm thinking of someone else. Lot of trucks out there, lot of nights." He stamped a small rectangular card with a metal date stamp. The sound was crisp, louder than Dave expected. Then he scribbled something on it and slid it across the counter. The card looked like an old way ticket. The paper was slightly rough, the ink a faded purple, like it came from a ribbon that hadn't been replaced in a long time. A small, round state seal was printed in the corner. "You're light enough," Harris said. "Watch your speed on the downgrade. Fog's thicker past the ridge. And don't pick anyone up on the shoulder between mile 140 and 145. Dave blinked. "Do what now?" "Don't pick anyone up," Harris repeated, mild as before. "Doesn't matter if they're waving, or in the road, or look hurt. Stay in your lane and keep moving. That section's bad for stopping." "All right," Dave said slowly. "I don't usually pick up anybody anyway." Harris nodded, satisfied. "Good. You're clear to go. Right lane only until the bridge." "The bridge?" Dave asked. "They tore that old thing down, didn't they?" "The road remembers what used to be there," Harris said, as if that explained everything. His eyes flicked once to the analog clock above the door. The second hand was still doing its strange, uneven circuit. "You'd better head out, driver. Fog's building." Dave tucked the card into his logbook, gave a polite nod, and turned to leave. As he reached for the door, the overhead lights flickered again. For a heartbeat, the glass pane in front of him showed not the neatly lit scale lanes outside, but a dim, ruin-darkened version of them. The overhead lamps were dead, the signs were blank. The only illumination came from his own truck's headlights, seen through the fog like two distant stars. The building's outer walls were blackened in irregular patches. One of the big windows was cracked through in a spiderweb pattern. He could see his own reflection in the dim glass-lined face, cap low over his eyes, but behind him, in the faint mirror of the office, there was no one at the counter. No Harris. No movement. Just empty space and dust. The lights steadied once again. The bright, orderly version of the station snapped back into existence. The scale lanes shone. The fog curled white and vague under the lamps. Dave stepped out into the damp night air. He climbed back into his cab and closed the door, the soft thump of it more comforting than he expected. For a moment, he just sat there, fingers on the wheel, listening to his own breathing and the faint idle of the engine. He flipped on the CB, more to hear another human voice than anything else. "Any of you boys know the deal with this way station at..." He leaned forward, squinting through the fog at the small sign on the side of the building. The numbers were blurred, but familiar. "At the top of Dawson Hill? They opened this thing back up?" Static hissed for a few seconds. Then a driver with a slow drawl came back. "Dawson Way? Nah, man, that place has been shut since... what, 10 years now? Fire took half the building. You seeing lights up there?" "I'm parked on the scale right now," Dave said before he could stop himself. "Guy inside just gave me a ticket." There was a pause. "Buddy," the other driver said carefully, "I'm rolling past that exit right now. It's dark as a graveyard. Way station closed sign and everything." Dave's skin crawled, prickling under his jacket. He flicked his eyes to his side mirror. Through the fog, he saw his own trailer, the faint glow of his marker lights, the gauzy suggestion of concrete barriers. Beyond that, where the building should be, was only a gray blank. He looked forward again. From this angle, through his rain-speckled windshield, the station looked as it had when he pulled in, lit, solid, real. The overhead signs cast pools of white onto the damp pavement. "Maybe you're just seeing things," the voice on the radio offered, not unkindly. "Fog'll do tricks on you." "Yeah," Dave said. "Maybe that's it." He eased off the brake and rolled forward as the scale light turned green. The road sloped downward gently, then fed him back toward the merge onto the interstate. As he approached the on-ramp, another sign loomed up on the right. In the sharp glare of his headlights, there was no missing it. Way station closed. No services. Chains held the metal plate in place, rusted in spots. No amber lights blinked along its edge. The slope up to the building beyond it was dark, featureless. But he'd just come down that slope. He glanced left as he climbed onto the highway. For a fraction of a second, through a thinning in the fog, he saw the outline of the station building up on the hill. It was blackened and broken, just as the other driver had said. One corner of the roof had collapsed inward. The windows were empty eyes. No lights, no movement. Then the fog thickened again and erased it from sight. Dave drove on, the interstate unfolding ahead of him like a rolling ribbon. The unease inside his chest rode with him, quiet but steady. The dash clock read 2:13 a.m. He thought of the analog clock in the Seaver office, its second hand stuttering its way around the face. He wondered how long it had been doing that. How many nights the road might have unrolled itself in the fog to reveal a building that no longer belonged there. 5 miles down the hill, the fog thinned a little. The beams of his headlights began to reach farther. The white lines grew crisp again. A green mile marker slid past, 140. The warning from the way station walked back into his mind with soft, careful steps. Don't pick anyone up on the shoulder between mile 140 and 145. He told himself it was just an old habit of local inspectors to warn about blind curves and bad patches. Still, his hands tightened slightly on the wheel. At 141, he saw the figure. It appeared in the reach of his headlights with the suddenness of a conjuring trick. A lone person standing at the edge of the shoulder, coat dark and long, one arm raised high in a clear, desperate signal. The figure stepped closer to the travel lane as he approached, the beam of his headlights spreading up across a pale face. The expression was hard to read at first. Could have been fear. Could have been anger. The raised arm shifted, the thumb extended in an unmistakable hitchhiker's pose. For a brief, uncomfortable moment, the scene pressed all the old instinctive buttons. Late night, cold fog, someone alone on a dangerous stretch of road. Every decent impulse said stop. He remembered the quiet tone of Harris's voice. Doesn't matter if they're waving, or in the road, or look hurt. Dave kept his hand steady on the wheel. He stayed in his lane. He did not slow. As his rig thundered past, the figure's head snapped to follow. For the barest second, as the person turned, the face crossed the beam of his headlights at just the right angle. There was nothing wrong with it. No absence of features. No grotesque contortion. It was just blank. Expressionless, in a way that seemed wrong on a human face at that moment. The eyes did not look angry or pleading. They looked simply aware. As if they were marking him, filing him away for later. In his mirror, he saw the figure step back onto the shoulder and lower the arm. It did not try to walk after him. It just stood there, watching his taillights fade into the fog. The next few miles slid by in tense quiet. At 145, another truck came into view ahead, its red taillights glowing faintly. Dave watched as it approached the place where the hitchhiker had been. The figure was still there. The oncoming rig slowed, brake lights flaring brighter for a second. Then, very gently, they eased back up. The truck did not stop. It rolled on. Maybe that driver had heard the same warning. Maybe he hadn't. Maybe the road itself had whispered something different in his ear. By the time Dave pulled into a well-lit truck stop an hour down the road, the fog was mostly behind him. Sodium lights cast an artificial orange day over the parking lot. Engines idled. Someone laughed near the fuel island. He killed his lights and sat for a moment, the quiet of the cab feeling oddly full. On a small shelf by his seat, his logbook lay where he'd set it. He picked it up and flipped to the page he'd been on. The weight ticket from the station sat there, pinned under the rubber band. The date stamped at the top was clear. Oct 17, 2:13 a.m. He checked the calendar on his phone. October 17. He rubbed a thumb across the paper. It felt solid and real. The purple ink of the stamp had bled very slightly into the fibers, just as older inks tended to do. On the bottom of the ticket, in neat handwriting, a small note had been added, "Stay in your lane." The state seal printed in the corner looked different from the modern one he knew. A tiny detail only someone from the area might notice, an older motto. A different border. The sort of thing changed years ago, and mostly forgotten. He slid the ticket back into the logbook and closed it gently. The next night, running the same stretch but on his return trip west, he watched the hill as he approached. The fog was thin, just wisps at the edges of the road. The way station sat on the rise, clearly visible. The building was dark and damaged, windows hollow, yard overgrown. A closed sign hung askew on the fence. No lights burned, no scales hummed. But as he passed the exit ramp, something caught his eye. The faintest suggestion of warm yellow glow behind one of the cracked windows. There and gone in the span of a blink, like the memory of a place that had once been open, reaching out one last time to tap the living world on the shoulder. He did not take the ramp that night. He drove on, staying in his lane, the hum of the tires and the dull, steady comfort of the engine keeping time with the quiet thought that settled and stayed. Some parts of the road did not forget the people who worked them. Some of those people, it seemed, did not forget either. Story number 3. On a long, straight ribbon of highway cutting through the West Texas night, a driver named Miguel Aranda rolled his rig beneath a sky, so empty it felt like it might swallow the road whole. He liked this route. USS 87 wasn't the fastest way to his drop, but it was quiet. 2 lanes, faint glow of small towns 30 miles apart, wide shoulders, long stretches where he could set the cruise and listen to the low murmur of the engine and his own thoughts. The dash clock glowed soft green, 1:07 a.m. Outside the windshield was a flat stretch of nothing scrub, mesquite, the ghostly silhouettes of fence posts gliding by at steady intervals. Once in a while the headlights would catch the faint glint of a cattle guard, or the pale flash of a jackrabbit bounding out of danger. His CB was on, volume low, tuned to 19. The channel was mostly static out here. Now and then a fragment of conversation would float in from someone far off, mixed accents, laughter, a warning about a speed trap near some town he'd passed an hour ago. He sipped lukewarm coffee from his travel mug and checked his mirrors. Trailer was steady. Lines on the road rolled backward into the dark. Up ahead, a green sign appeared in the distance, a bright little rectangle hanging in a sea of black. As he drew closer, the reflective letters came into focus. Lubbock, 68. Next, services, 31. He mentally measured his fuel and his energy. He could probably make it all the way without stopping if he wanted to, but he'd decide later. The road had a way of changing its mind for him. The CB crackled once, then settled. Miguel reached out and nudged the volume knob up a bit, if only to have some human noise. For a while, there was nothing but static. Then, cutting through it cleanly and softly, a young voice spoke on the channel. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Miguel straightened, hand hovering over the mic. The voice sounded like a girl, 12 or 13 maybe. Not the kind of thing you usually heard out here at 1 in the morning. He waited, thinking he'd imagined it. Static hissed, then cleared again. "Please," the girl said. "Is someone there?" He grabbed the mic. "This is northbound on 87, he said, trying to keep his tone calm. "Who's calling?" Silence. The green transmit light on the CB glowed under his thumb, then went dark when he let go. No answer. He frowned. Could have been bleed-through from some other frequency. Some kid messing with a base station on a ranch. Or a memory. His mind conjuring voices after too many hours awake. He was about to lower the volume again when the voice came once more, closer this time, like the speaker had leaned into the mic. We tipped over," she said. "The bus tipped over. It's dark. Mr. Harris says to stay calm, but he can't open the door. Is anyone there? Please, say something." Miguel's stomach went cold. He hit the key. Hey, hold up. Where are you, kid? What highway are you on?" Static. No crackle of background noise. Just empty, thin, static hissing in his cab. "I don't know," the girl said after a long heartbeat. She sounded like she might cry, but she wasn't. Her voice had that thin, high, controlled sound of someone holding a panic in place. "It's the long road, with the fences. He said there's a number on the sign." Miguel glanced at the shoulder. A white mile marker slid into his headlights. 219. "Do you see a number that says 2119? He asked quickly. 219? Something like that?" Silence again. The only sound was his own tires humming on the asphalt. Then, almost on top of his own words. "It says 219. The girl answered. Relief and fear braided into one tight thread. "Please, is someone coming? It's been so long." Miguel's hand tightened on the mic. He looked around. The highway ahead was empty. No flashing lights, no brake lights. Just the straight black strip vanishing under his wheels. "Hang on," he said. "Stay where you are and stay calm, okay? I'm at that same marker. I'm going to look for you." He eased off the accelerator and scanned the shoulders, both sides. His beams washed over mesquite and scrub, barbed wire, a dry ditch. No ditch wide enough to hide a bus. No fresh skid marks. Nothing. The dash clock read 1:12 a.m. The CB crackled, a different texture of static, then cleared. Another voice slid in on top of the fuzz, older, male, with a lazy drawl. "Northbound talking to a kid at 219, the man said. "You picking up that driver?" Miguel jumped slightly. "Yeah," he answered. "You hear her too?" "Sure do," the man replied. "Name's Rusty. Run this road more nights than I can count. Don't spook now." "You near that marker?" "Just past it," Miguel said. "Didn't see anything. She says a bus tipped. Maybe she's on a different 87 some other state." Rusty was quiet for a second. "Nah," he said gently. "She's on your stretch. Everybody hears her once if they run nights this time of year. You ain't gonna see her though. At least not the way you want to." Miguel felt the air in the cab cool by a degree, though the heater was on the same setting. "What's that supposed to mean?" Rusty exhaled, the sound fuzzing with the static like a tired sigh. "School bus rolled out here about 15, 16 years back," he said. "Fog slick patch, driver overcorrected. Went down in one of those dry gullies. No reception back then. All they had were the call boxes. One every couple miles." Miguel's headlights slid over another white marker. 220. "I haven't seen any call boxes," he said. "Those blue posts with the phones, they pulled those out years ago." "Yeah," Rusty agreed. "They did. After that wreck, some folks said the phones out here never stopped ringing. Dispatchers getting calls with nobody on the line. Kids whispering things, asking why nobody was coming. They tore the boxes out, but... well, tearing out a phone doesn't always end the conversation, if you catch my drift." Miguel swallowed. Ahead, a small sign appeared at the right shoulder. "Emergency call box 1 mile." The metal was sun-abluched and riddled with tiny rust spots. Looked like it hadn't been updated in years. His brows pulled together. He reached over and turned the CB down a notch. Rusty's voice faded to a low murmur, but he could still make it out. "You heading north?" the older driver asked. "Yeah," Miguel said. "Toward Lubbock. You'll come up on where that bus went over," Rusty told him. "They filled the gully some. Smoothed it out. You can't see much from the road now. There's a little cross on a fence post, that's all. When you pass it, don't you go pulling over. Don't you go climbing down there, you hear? Road's done what it can. You can't do more." Miguel wanted to say that if a kid was asking for help, he couldn't just drive by. But the words felt heavy and strange on his tongue. The next sign appeared quickly through the dark. "Emergency call box, 1/4 mile." An arrow underneath pointed forward. He could see it then, a slender vertical shape just at the edge of his beams, a faded blue post leaning slightly, a small metal cabinet at its side. No visible wires, no shiny handset, just an empty bracket where something used to hang. Yet as he drew level with it, a small rectangle of amber light glowed briefly on the face of the box, like a screen waking. Then it went dark. The CB hissed, then popped. The girl's voice came back, half overlapping the memory of Rusty's. "There's glass everywhere," she said softly. "Some of the kids aren't talking anymore. It's cold. Mr. Harris is bleeding. He told me to call the number on the sign. Please, please answer. Why won't anyone answer?" Miguel's chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with long hours in a seat. He flicked the CB volume all the way down, cutting her voice off mid-breath. The sudden quiet felt thick. The road hummed under him. Mile marker 221 slid past. Then 222. He told himself to keep going. He was one man in one truck, years too late for something that had already happened. He knew this, clearly, in the front of his mind. But a smaller, stubborn part of him, the part that remembered his own daughter's voice when she'd been about that age, would not let it rest. At mile 223, there was a break in the fence line. A narrow dirt track cut away from the highway, barely wide enough for a pickup. A rusty gate stood open. Next to it, on one weather-worn post, hung a small white cross, its paint peeling. Miguel's hands moved before the rest of him had decided. He signaled and eased onto the shoulder, his turn indicator clicking in the empty night. The rig slowed, rumbling to a stop opposite the break in the fence. He turned on his hazard lights. They pulsed orange against the scrub and dust. For a moment he just sat there, the tick of the flasher loud in the cab. The girl's last words replayed themselves in his head even with the radio turned down. Why won't anyone answer? He reached for the door handle. As he did, a faint glow flickered in the corner of his eye. He turned to the right. The emergency call box he'd passed a minute back stood about 40 yards behind, its pale post only just catchable in his taillight's reach. A small, square light on its face had come to life again, dim, coppery, like the backlight of an old digital display. It wasn't steady. It throbbed faintly, on and off, like a heartbeat. The air in the cab felt colder now, though the vents blew the same temperature. He opened the door. The night hit him like a wall dry, still, with a faint dusty smell. The sky overhead stretched clear and starro-chalked. The highway around him looked endless in both directions, empty lanes spilling into the vanishing point. The sound of his own hazard flashers pulsed in his ears. He walked back along the shoulder, gravel crunching under his boots. The call box got closer, its light a weak little glow in all that darkness. Up close, he could see the unit was in bad shape. The paint had faded from blue to a kind of washed-out gray. The metal cabinet's door hung slightly crooked on one hinge. On its front, in ghost-pale lettering, the word emergency was barely visible. There was no phone on the outside, no visible receiver, but the little rectangle of light shone from within a narrow slit, like a tiny window. As he stood there, it flicked brighter. A sound slipped out through the gap, faint at first, then clearer. A phone ringing, not a modern cell ringtone. An old, simple bell, shrill and insistent. Miguel's heart pounded in his throat. This is stupid, he told himself. It's some weird interference. A battery backfeed, whatever. Turn around. Get back in the truck. The phone kept ringing. On the sixth ring, it clicked. The sound somehow both inside the metal box and directly in front of his ear. A calm woman's voice spoke, distant and thin. 911. What is your emergency? For a heartbeat, Miguel couldn't speak. Static whispered faintly on the edges of the line. Then layered under the operator's voice, like a recording playing half a beat behind. The girl came through again. There was a crash, she said. The bus tipped. We're at marker 219. Please hurry. Please. Her words overlapped with a ghost of her own voice, a loop that didn't quite sync with itself. The effect was dizzying, like hearing two versions of the same speech, trying to occupy the same space. The operator said with patient calm, "Okay, sweetheart, I need you to stay on the line. Can you tell me your name?" "Emily," the girl replied from everywhere at once. Miguel stood on the shoulder of a dry Texas highway, 21st century truck parked behind him, and listened to a call that had gone out years before. He realized, with a quiet, creeping certainty, that no matter what he said now, the operator on that old line would not hear him. That call had already run its course a long time ago. Officers had already been dispatched. Other voices had already taken over. An entire night had already passed, and many more after it. He was not part of that moment. He was only near it, close enough to feel its edges. His throat tightened. He could hang up, he thought. Walk away. Let the line keep playing out its loop, untouched. A part of him felt like that would be cruel, even if no one on the other end could hear him. He swallowed once, hard, and leaned closer to the box. "Emily," he said softly, though he knew she wasn't truly there. "Help's coming. They heard you. Just hang on, okay? You did what you were supposed to." For the briefest instant, everything went quiet. The operator's voice stopped. The girl's overlapping words froze mid-syllable. In that thin slice of silence, the desert felt absolutely still, like the entire world was holding its breath. Then the phone line let out a small, soft click, and the light in the call box went out. Miguel stood there a moment longer, listening to his own pulse drum in his ears. Behind him, his hazard flashers ticked on and off, patient and unchanged. When he climbed back into his cab, the interior felt different. Not safer, not haunted, just aware, like the truck itself had been listening. He sat with his hands on the wheel for a minute, then slowly turned the CB back up. Static rushed in. Rusty's voice came through almost immediately, quiet this time. "You stopped, didn't you?" the older driver said, not accusing, just stating. "Yeah," Miguel answered. "At the box. Saw her memorial too, I bet," Rusty went on. "Little white cross on the post. Harris name on it?" Miguel glanced out the passenger side window as he eased back onto the highway. The cross by the gate stood small and pale in his headlight wash. Even at this distance, he could just make out the faint black letters on its horizontal plank. Emily Harris. Loved, never forgotten. A date was carved underneath. 17 years ago to the day. The time chiseled smaller below. 1. 17 amperes. M. Miguel's. Dash clock turned over as he watched. "Edan Shitsifen." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I saw it." Rusty made a small sound that might have been agreement. "She calls every year, far as I can tell. Some hear, some don't. Some stop. Some just keep rolling. Can't change what happened." But he let the thought hang unfinished. Miguel drove in silence for a while, the white lines unspooling steadily under his wheels. The night felt just a little less empty. Up ahead, another green sign appeared, its letters glowing back at him. Lubbock 52. He checked his mirrors. The dark road stretched clean and straight behind him, his taillights the only moving color. On the shoulder just past the break in the fence, he saw a brief glint of something small and reflective beside the cross. A toy, maybe. Or flowers wrapped in foil. A new token left by someone who still came out here in daylight. He wondered, not unkindly, how many drivers over the years had heard that thin, brave voice on their radios, or through dead phones, or half-remembered dreams. How many had spoken back, even knowing the past didn't bend. The CB crackled with other talk, then weather up ahead. A joke about bad coffee at a certain truck stop. An argument about sports. The ordinary sound of the road reclaimed the night. Miguel let it wash over him, the way his headlights washed over the asphalt. He drove on, not faster and not slower, the steady hum of the tires carrying him past the markers and the memories and into whatever waited beyond the next pool of light. Story number 4. On a humid summer night in late August, a driver named Calvin Briggs guided his rig along a 2-lane highway that wound through the low river country. The world outside his windshield was a tunnel of black, framed by his headlights and the pale stripe of the center line. Crickets rasped in the ditches. The air had that heavy feel that meant the river wasn't far. He'd been warned about this stretch. US 65 at the river? An older driver had said back at the truck stop. That bridge is a mile long and half a century old. Don't hit it in bad weather if you can help it. Calvin hadn't planned to, but a delay at the shipper had pushed him into the small hours. His GPS glowed quietly on the dash, blue line leading him straight across the water. No storms on the radar. Just a thick, low fog pooling near the river, according to the weather app. The clock on the dash read 2:27 a.m. He took a sip from his bottle of water, cleared his throat, and rolled on. The CB was mostly silent. Now and then a far-off voice would flicker in and out, but no one seemed nearby. The first sign appeared out of the darkness on the right, glowing green in his beams. River crossing 2 miles. Construction ahead. Expect delays. He frowned slightly. His pre-trip notes hadn't mentioned active construction, just a line about 1-lane control possible. That could mean a long wait if the flaggers were running 15-minute cycles. The land dipped gently. Trees on either side thickened, their crowns reaching over the highway to knit together in the dark. The air seeping in around his windows grew cooler, damp, with river breath. Another sign loomed up. Bridge work ahead. 1 lane. Stop when signal is red. Beneath it, a portable digital board flashed an alternating message in amber points of light. Single O-lane traffic. Wait for green. The road narrowed. Concrete barriers appeared along the shoulders, guiding him into a straight, controlled chute. Beyond them, the world fell away into a dim gray nothing. Calvin eased off the accelerator. Up ahead, he saw it. A tall, skeletal frame of steel rising out of the fog. Square arches repeating into darkness. The old truss bridge stretched far over the unseen river, its girders black against the sky. Just before it, a traffic signal hung over the lane, suspended from a temporary metal arm. It glowed a calm, unwavering red. He rolled to a stop about 30 feet back, set his brake, and checked his mirrors. No headlights behind him, no oncoming glow on the far side of the bridge. Just the red light, the barriers, and the steel shadow reaching over the water. He expected to hear the usual background noises of a construction zone generators, occasional clanks, voices. There was nothing. Only the low idle of his own engine and the thin hiss of the river breeze. He glanced at the dash. 2:30 a.m. He tapped the steering wheel with his thumb, looked at the GPS. The little arrow sat politely at the beginning of the bridge, waiting. Estimated arrival time flickered, then adjusted a few minutes later. The red light didn't change. He told himself it hadn't been that long, maybe a couple of minutes. Long cycles were normal on an old bridge like this, where it took time for each line of traffic to clear. He turned down the radio a notch and cracked his window. The air that flowed in was cool and smelled faintly of wet steel and river mud. Underneath it, so faint he almost missed it, came another scent. Hot brakes. The acrid tang of overheated pads and rubber. He frowned. There were no other vehicles within sight. Somewhere out in the darkness ahead, something low and metallic groaned, like a guardrail flexing under weight. The sound came and went quickly, swallowed by the fog. The dash clock still read 2:30. He watched the seconds. The little digital bars blinked. 30, 31, 32. Time was moving. It just felt thick. He shifted in his seat and reached for his phone. A notification pulsed on the screen from a scanner app he sometimes used on long nights. A holdover habit from his father who had worked highway maintenance. Severe incident, U.S.E. Lover Bridge, archived audio available. The date stamp under it made him pause. Aug 28, 2:30 a.m., 10 years ago. He hadn't opened the app. It had started itself. Before he could think better of it, his thumb brushed the notification. The app bloomed on screen, interface plain, a list of channels. One recording sat at the top, highlighted. USS 65 incident. Playback. His thumb hovered, then tapped. A crackle of static filled the cab, thin and distant. Then a dispatcher's voice came through, sharper but warped slightly, like an old cassette. All units, be advised. We have reports of a multi-vehicle collision on the USS 65 River Bridge. Possible entrapment, fog conditions. Timestamp 2:30 hours. Use caution on approach. Bridge is single lane due to construction. Traffic backed up in both directions. The words sank into the small space of the truck like cold water. Another voice came on, breathless. Keyed up. Dispatch. This is Unit 12. I'm about a mile out. Can confirm visibility near zero. I can see brake lights stacked all the way across. Looks like at least one semi-jackknifed near center span. Hold on. Looks like a bus involved too. We're gonna need multiple ambulances out here. Calvin's fingers tightened on the phone. The scanner app ticked the recorded time along the bottom. 2:30, 2:31, 2:32. His dash clock read Deutstrinta. He clicked the app closed with more force than necessary. The cab fell back into its quiet hum. Up ahead, the red light burned, unwavering. He told himself this was a coincidence. Old recordings queued up by an algorithm that noticed where he was. Highway departments loved these grim reminders from the past, but he did not press play again. Minutes crawled in fits and starts. Once, he thought he saw a set of headlights blossom at the far end of the bridge, faint through the fog. They glowed larger for a second, then winked out, as if a vehicle had crested into view and then simply gone. He rubbed his eyes. The steel arches of the bridge loomed, black and rigid. The fog clung low around their bases, making the structure look like it was rising out of shifting clouds. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his company's dispatch app. A small banner slid down. Delay alert. Heavy traffic. US 60, 5 bridge. He swiped it away without opening it. Something lightly tapped the top of his cab. Once. Twice. Like gravel falling from a height. He leaned forward and looked up through the windshield. Nothing but the underside of the signal arm and the night beyond. He listened. Faintly, under the murmur of his own engine, he heard a distant, overlapping chorus of horns. Some short, angry blasts. Some long and mournful. They seemed both far away and all around. The hairs on his arms lifted. Lights broken, he muttered half to himself. Has to be. Stuck on red. As if in answer, the signal above the lane flickered. For an instant, the red disc went dark. The whole assembly blinked. Then, slowly, the green lens brightened, color bleeding into it from the edges, until it burned clear. The little sign bolted to the post beside it glowed white. Proceed when green. Calvin exhaled, long and controlled. About time, he said, more loudly than necessary. He eased off the brake, rolled forward, and nudged the rig onto the bridge. As his front tires crossed the first expansion joint, the world changed. The hum of the pavement became a hollow, vibrating thrum through the steel. The fog on the bridge was thicker than it had looked from shore. His headlights struck it and stopped, making a pale, dense wall 10 truck lengths ahead. The overhead arches appeared and disappeared, one after another, as he moved under them. He kept his speed at a cautious 15, hands steady. The green, to light behind him, spilled a faint glow onto the girders. Ahead, the far end of the bridge was just a gray void. Halfway to the second arch, he felt it. A soft, rhythmic shake in the steering wheel, like the turbulence of another vehicle's wake. He glanced in his side mirror. For a heartbeat, he saw it. The looming rectangle of a trailer right behind him, so close he could almost read the grain of its side. Its marker lights burned a dim, fuzzy red through the fog, but his trailer camera showed nothing. His own unit stood alone behind him in the grainy feed. He swallowed and faced forward again. The faint smell of hot brakes grew stronger. It blended with another scent now. Exhaust. Too many engines idling in close quarters. The scanner app, still open in the background, crackled by itself. A voice spilled out through the phone speaker, tinny but urgent. Unit 5 to dispatch. We're on scene. Traffic is at a standstill across the entire span. Multiple vehicles involved. Heavy fog. Visibility maybe 10 feet. I've got folks out of their cars walking around. We need to shut this bridge down both ways. Calvin reached for the phone, meaning to kill the app, but his fingers shook just enough to miss the icon. The device slid a few inches on the dash. Ahead, through the sheet of fog, a shape flickered into view. Hazard lights. 2 orange points blinking in unison, the dull glow low and dead center in his lane. As he drew closer, they lifted, resolved. The vague outline of a sedan appeared, stopped in the middle of the bridge, its rear window coated with moisture. He felt the instinctive shock of recognition. Stopped vehicle. No shoulder to swerve to, heavy load behind him. His right foot twitched toward the brake. He hesitated. The hazard lights blinked again. For a fraction of a second between flashes, the shape of the car thinned at the edges, like fog. The scanner voice overlapped his thoughts. Cars are packed in both directions. Some tried to turn around, got stuck sideways. We've got people yelling that they saw a semi coming in too fast. Calvin tightened his jaw. He shifted his gaze, forced it to lock on the faint center line beneath his headlights. He set his speed and held it, not speeding up, not slowing more than he already had. The blinking hazards brightened as he approached, as if he was closing in at normal speed. And then, as his bumper would have met the back of the car, they vanished. Not swerved around, not slid to the side. Gone. The bridge ahead was empty, just his beams cutting through white. Something brushed along his trailer, a whisper of contact from nowhere, as if his rig had passed through a narrow gap between unseen objects. Adrenaline crackled at the base of his skull. Keep going, he said under his breath. Just keep going. The arches overhead repeated. Each one felt slightly closer together than the last, as if the bridge were stretching while he moved. Off to his left, between the girders, the fog thinned for a heartbeat. In that small window, far below, He glimpsed the river. Black, slow, mirror still. But there were other shapes there too, stacked along the concrete barrier, the hulking outlines of vehicles, half in and half out of the lane, some with doors hanging open. Figures moved among them, just flashes of motion in his peripheral vision. A person in a reflective vest waving both arms, another standing on a bumper. He didn't hear their voices, only the recorded echoes from his phone. Multiple injuries. Can't get an ambulance through. Everything's blocked. He kept his eyes forward. The center of the bridge felt like a different world, a compressed place where a knight from 10 years ago and the night he was in had tried to occupy the same space for a little while. A shape loomed ahead on the right. A cruiser, angled across the lane, light bar pulsing but in absolute silence. The blue and red flashes painted the fog in brief, violent colors. A figure stood in front of it, one arm raised in the universal gesture to stop. For a second, Calvin's hands wanted to obey that command the way every driver was trained to. The figure's vest glowed an intense, almost too bright yellow. The face was lost in shadow. The raised hand did not move as he approached, did not wave him through, did not gesture to a shoulder that did not exist. Something about the stillness of it was wrong. His fingers felt slick on the wheel. He heard the recorded trooper again, from that old call, almost over his own heartbeat. "Dispatch, we need this traffic halted off the bridge. No more vehicles on. It's a parking lot up here." The green light behind him glowed on the steel. He did not stop. He took his foot off the accelerator, let the rig roll at its slow crawl, and committed to his path. Centered between the barriers, hands steady. As his bumper reached the place where the silent cruiser blocked the lane, the vehicle and the figure in front of it dissolved like breath on a mirror. The fog closed, then parted behind him. The smell of hot brakes faded. The scanner app sputtered once more with a scrap of audio. Time of incident, 2030 hours, then clicked off on its own. There was a subtle lift in the air, a change in tone as his tires crossed another expansion joint. The fog thinned almost at once. The black arch over his cab gave way to open sky. Ahead, the far end of the bridge materialized concrete ramp, climbing back up to solid ground. Beyond it, a pull-off area sat lit by a pair of tall floodlights, their beams cutting cleanly through what little mist remained. A real modern state trooper cruiser waited there, blue stripe along its side, hood gleaming. Its light bar was dark. A figure leaned against the front fender, arms folded. As Calvin rolled off the bridge and into the illuminated pull-off, the trooper straightened and stepped forward, one hand lifted in a casual signal to stop. He eased onto the gravel and set his brake, heart still beating higher than it should. The trooper walked up to the driver's window. His face was lined, his hair shot with gray. His name tag read, Keller. "Evening," Keller said. "Appreciate you taking it slow across there." Calvin pushed the window down halfway. "Everything okay, officer?" The trooper gave a small, humorless smile. "As okay as it gets on this date, I suppose." He glanced back at the bridge. Its steel frame rose black against the sky, perfectly ordinary from this angle. "You see anything odd out there?" Keller asked. It was the careful way he said it that made the question stranger. Calvin hesitated. He thought of the car that wasn't there, the silent cruiser. The shapes of piled vehicles glimpsed through the girders, the echoing voices on his phone. "I heard something," he said at last. Scanner app picked up an old recording, about a pileup, smelled brakes. Felt like I was driving through somebody else's bad night. Keller nodded, as if that matched a pattern. 10 years to the minute, he said quietly. Fog rolled in, same as tonight. Construction had the bridge down to one lane. Some folks stopped when they shouldn't have. Some didn't stop when they should have. Whole span became a parking lot full of frightened people. He looked back at Calvin, eyes serious but not unkind. "Ever since we get calls on this night," the trooper continued, "drivers saying they saw cars stopped on the bridge, or an officer waving them down, or brake lights when there's nobody there. Folks hear old radio chatter on scanners that aren't even on. You'd be surprised how many think they're losing their minds." Calvin managed a tight, wry breath. "I can see that. We keep someone here now," Keller said, nodding toward his cruiser. "Helps to have a real live person to talk to when they roll off." He studied Calvin's face for a second. "You didn't stop on the span, did you?" "No," Calvin answered. "Kept moving. Slow, but moving. Good, Keller said simply. Best to let the past stay where it is. They talked a minute more. License, registration, small formalities that felt comforting in their normalcy. Then Keller stepped back and gave a short wave. Safe travels, driver. Fog thins out a few miles up, and if your radio starts playing anything else that doesn't sound like it belongs, you just ignore it. Calvin nodded, rolled up the window, and eased back onto the highway. In his mirror, he watched the pull-off recede. The trooper's cruiser became a small, dark shape under the floodlights. Beyond it, the long bridge stretched over the invisible river, a simple line of steel and concrete. For a heartbeat, as he crested a small rise, he saw movement there, a shimmer of red and white lights clustered halfway across, like a slowed-down memory of vehicles stopped where no vehicle stood. Then the angle changed, and the bridge was just a quiet silhouette again. The dash clock ticked over to 2:41 a.m. The road ahead opened, drier and clearer, lines sharp and reflective in his beams. The hum under his wheels fell back into its normal rhythm. Calvin turned the scanner app off completely and set his music to a low, steady playlist. No lyrics, just sound. He drove on into the thinning night, the river at his back, the strange weight of that narrow mile slowly loosening its grip as the highway unwound in front of him. Story number 5. The first time Jenna saw the trailer, she didn't like it, and I couldn't say exactly why. It sat by itself at the far end of the yard, backed into a shadowed corner between two dead reefers waiting for service. The white paint was dull, the company logo half peeled along the side. On the nose of the unit, stenciled in fading black, was the trailer number, 7,313. The dispatcher handed her the paperwork. Cold load, he said. Produce, Indy to Salt Lake. Reefer's already running. Set points 30 to 6. Sign here. Grab it. And you're gone. Jenna glanced toward the far end of the lot through the office window. The yard lights turned the trailers into pale, silent blocks. 7,313's refrigeration unit hummed. A faint, mechanical murmur, even from here. How old is that unit? She asked. Looks like one of the older Thermo Kings. The dispatcher shrugged. We rotate 'em. That one's been local for a while. Runs fine. You rolling or shopping? For something prettier? She didn't push it. She signed, grabbed the keys, and headed out into the warm Indiana night. The air outside smelled like hot asphalt and diesel. Crickets sang from the drainage ditch. Her boots clicked over cracked concrete as she crossed the lot, the reefer's hum growing louder. Up close, the trailer really did look tired. Faint streaks of rust ran from the rivets. The refrigeration unit's plastic cover was yellowed and scored with old scratches, but the digital display on the side glowed a steady green. Set point, 36华氏度. Return, 37华氏度. Door, closed. She laid a hand against the side panel. It vibrated faintly with the engine. Cold leached through the metal, even in the muggy air. Jenna walked to the back. The swing doors were shut tight and sealed with a numbered plastic tag. She checked the seal against her paperwork and nodded. Everything matched. Her own truck waited a few rows over, the blue cab a familiar comfort. She backed carefully under 7,313, locked the fifth wheel, cranked up the legs, and plugged in the electrical. When she pulled forward, the trailer settled behind her with a soft, final weight. By the time she hit the interstate heading west, the clock on the dash read 11:48 p.m. The highway outside Indianapolis thinned as she rolled away from the city lights. Night wrapped around the rig, broken only by the steady glare of her headlights and the occasional oncoming car. The CB was turned down low, mostly static with a few stray conversations drifting in now and then. On the dash, just left of her gauges, a small aftermarket display showed the reefer's readings via a wireless link. It was a simple unit, just 3 digits and a little icon for door status. At first, it behaved as expected. 37, 36, 36. Door. Closed. Jenna settled into the familiar rhythm of the road check mirrors, check gauges, scan ahead, sip coffee. The trailer rode smoothly. No sway. No thunks from the load. South of Chicago, with cornfields stretching in flat, dark sheets on either side. The reefer display blinked. For a moment, the numbers scrambled, then held. 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Jenna frowned. That was far too cold for lettuce and berries. Seconds later, it jumped again. 50. 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Then 36 degrees Fahrenheit. Probably the signal, she muttered. Old trailer. Old wires. Still, a small thread of unease ran under her ribs. A bad reading could mean a bad sensor. A bad sensor could mean a spoiled load and a very upset receiver. She reached for the control head switch and tapped it. The screen steadied on 36 degrees Fahrenheit. She turned up the CB a notch, if only to not be alone with the whine of the unit. Any westbound on 80 getting weird readings on your reefers tonight? She asked, half joking. Static answered, then a chuckle from somewhere far down the line. Nah, sister. Just my fuel gauge. That thing lies like my ex. She smiled despite herself and let it go. Around 1:15 a.m., just past the Iowa border, the humming changed. It wasn't louder, exactly. It just seemed to draw her attention in the way a dripping faucet in a quiet house did. The vibration through the floor was a little sharper. On the dash display, the word door flickered. Open. Closed. Open. Closed. Her eyes went to the mirrors at once. In the right side glass, the trailer door was a pale rectangle in the darkness, perfectly shut. No swinging metal, no flapping seal. She watched it for a good 30 seconds. It did not move. On the display, the word door froze back on closed. Temp. 36 degrees Fahrenheit. A long, empty rest area approached. On impulse, she took the exit, tires singing on the rumble strips. The parking lot was half full of sleeping trucks, their marker lights glowing faint red and amber in the dark. She picked a space under a sodium lamp, set the brake, and shut down the engine. The sudden silence pressed at her ears. The reefer hummed on. Stepping down from the cab, she felt the night air brush against her face, warm and thick. Crickets sang here too, but from farther away. The reefer's purr was the loudest sound nearby. She walked to the back of the trailer. The metal skin of the doors felt cold under her fingers. The numbered seal was intact, its plastic tail threaded cleanly through the hasps. Jenna stood still and listened. For a long moment, there was nothing but the engine. Then, very faintly, from somewhere inside the insulated box, she heard it. 3 soft taps, spaced evenly, like knuckles against metal. She froze. The night around her remained undisturbed. No footsteps, no voices. A breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass and diesel. Hello? She called, hating how small her voice sounded. Anyone in there? Silence. This trailer was sealed when I picked it up, she said more firmly. If somebody's in there, you need to answer me, and I'll call someone to get you out. Nothing. The reefer kept humming. She told herself it could have been the load settling. Boxes shifting a millimeter under vibration. Old metal making old sounds. 3 taps, in a row, evenly spaced. Her mind insisted on that detail. She stood there another full minute, waiting for it to happen again. It did not. Eventually, she circled back to the cab, climbed in, and shut the door. The interior felt safer, not because it was any stronger, but because it was familiar. She made a note on her trip sheet. 1:30 a.m. Reefer sensor glitch? Knocking sound? She underlined the question mark. Then she turned the key and rolled back out onto the highway. In the next hour, nothing unusual happened. The display held steady. The unit hummed its mechanical lullaby. The sky to the west grew a shade darker, if that was even possible. Then, at 2:34 a.m., as the interstate bent through a long, low curve past an unlit exit, the reefer alarm beeped. It was a high, insistent chirp from the dash unit. AL3, the screen read. Door open. Jenna's hands tightened on the wheel. In her right mirror, the trailer doors were, as before, shut, latched. No sign of anything opening. She flicked on her hazard lights and coasted onto the wide shoulder. Gravel crackled under her tires as she came to a stop. The night here was darker. No truck stop glow nearby. Just the outline of distant trees against the sky. She hit the dome light and picked up the manual for the unit. AL3. Door switch fault. Divided by door open. Check rear doors. And sensor. Yeah, she breathed. We're checking. Stepping out onto the shoulder, the isolation of this bit of highway clamped down around her. The ribbon of concrete stretched ahead and behind, empty. No headlights in either direction. She walked back along the trailer, boots crunching on gravel. The reefer's hum was lower now, strained, like a fridge trying to run with the door ajar. At the back, the doors still appeared shut. The seal was unbroken. The handle hadn't moved. Jenna reached out and touched the steel. Something tapped back. Not loud, not frantic. But this time, there was no mistaking the intent. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 more. The pattern was too deliberate to be settling freight. Her breath hitched. "Who's in there?" she asked, the words coming out sharper. "This trailer was sealed. Talk to me." From the other side of the door came a sound like a breath against cold metal. A short huff. Fog on a winter window. Then, very faintly, "Don't open." The words were muffled, distorted by inches of insulation and steel. They could have been something else. Her own imagination. Wind. Engine. Anything. But her mind heard them clearly. "Don't open." A chill ran across her shoulders despite the humidity. "Are you stuck?" she asked. "I can get help. I can break the seal. Just talk to me." Silence. Only the low, strained churn of the refrigeration unit, working harder now. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, the sudden vibration making her jump. It was dispatch. "Hey, Jenna," the night guy's voice came through, casual. "Reefer on 7313 just pinged us with a door alarm." "You stopped?" "Yeah," she said, trying to keep her voice level. "It's showing open, but it's sealed. I'm at mile marker 201 on I-880. Nobody around. I thought I heard..." She cut herself off. "I thought I heard the load shift, that's all." The dispatcher hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yeah, that unit's touchy about that sensor. Half the guys here hate it. Listen, you good to keep rolling? If the temp's holding, just watch it. We can note the alarm." Jenna glanced at the reefer display on the side of the trailer. The little screen wavered, numbers climbing. 41 дриф. 43 дриф. "It's rising," she said. "Up into the 40s. Not great," dispatch admitted. "If it hits 50, we've got a problem. You're too far from a shop at this hour. If you pop the doors, you'll dump what cold you've got." She thought of the whisper. "Don't open." "What's the story with this trailer?" she asked abruptly. "You said it's been local. Why?" The dispatcher sighed, the sound crackling slightly. "There was an incident with it a few winters back. Guy working in the yard climbed in while it was running and somebody closed it up behind him. Didn't know he was in there. They didn't find him until morning. After that, folks around here got spooked about sending it long haul. But it's just a trailer, Jenna. Metal and freon. Sensors glitch, that's all." Her free hand tightened on the cold door handle. Metal and freon, and one very real memory soaked into it. "I'll keep going," she said at last. "For now. If it keeps climbing, I'm calling you back." "Copy that. Keep an eye on it." The call clicked off. She stood there a moment longer, fingers resting on the handle. The steel was cold enough to sting. No further taps came. No whisper. She pictured the inside of the trailer, white walls, rows of stacked boxes, breath hanging in the air. The man who'd been locked in years ago, pounding on the doors, voice freezing in his throat. Was the "don't open" for her benefit? For the cargoes? Or an echo of something he'd said in terror, reversed by time? She didn't know. She stepped away from the door. Back in the cab, she watched the dash display. 46华氏度. 47华氏度. Don't open. Something in her repeated. She released the brake and pulled back onto the interstate. For 10 uneasy minutes, the temperature continued to climb. Sweat beaded at the back of her neck despite the air conditioning. She imagined produce warming, wilting on its pallets. Then, with a small mechanical cough from the unit behind her, the digits stopped. 47华氏度. 47华氏度. 36华氏度. The number dropped in clean, even steps, as if someone had flicked a reset. Within 3 minutes, it was back at the set point. The alarm cleared itself. Door closed. Jenna let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She drove until the edges of the sky in her mirrors began to pale. At dawn, she pulled into a fuel stop in western Nebraska, parked among a row of reefers, and killed the engine. The chorus of refrigeration units filled the air, different pitches blending into something almost like distant surf. Another driver, older, with a graying beard and a faded cap, nodded to her as he topped off his tanks. His eyes went briefly to her trailer number. "You pulled 7,313?" he asked. She wiped diesel off her hand. "Yeah." He grimaced with a sort of reluctant sympathy. "That one's got stories." "I heard," she said carefully. "The incident. In the yard." He nodded once. "I was there that winter. Before your time. Folks say when that unit alarms on a clear night, you don't ignore it means something's wrong. And if it tells you not to open, you don't. Strange thing is," he glanced at her. "Couple months after it happened, another driver heard knocking and opened up at the side of the road. Thought maybe it was kids hiding in there. Door swung wide, unit dropped temp fast, lines froze, compressor seized, lost the whole load. Nobody inside. Company almost scrapped the box right then." Jenna felt a small shiver move down her spine. "What do you think it wants?" she asked, surprised at her own wording. The older driver gave a tired half-smile. "Maybe it doesn't want anything. Maybe what happened to that guy is just stuck in the walls, like a song on repeat. Only thing I know is, I've hauled that trailer twice." He held up 2 fingers. "First time I stopped when it alarmed, opened it, made everything worse. Second time, I left it sealed and trusted the gauges. Nothing went wrong. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the dead is not repeat their worst moment." She turned that over in her mind. Later that afternoon, at the receiver's dock in Salt Lake, she broke the seal in front of the warehouse supervisor and swung the doors open. A rush of cold air billowed out, frosty and clean. Boxes sat in neat stacks, plastic wrapped tight, no signs of shifting. A thermometer probe from the receiver slid between cartons and came back with a perfect reading. "Nice work," the supervisor said, scribbling on his clipboard. "Temp logs clean too." She glanced at the thin roll of paper curling from the reefer's printer. Little lines of numbers marched down it. At 2:34 a.m., where her dash unit had screamed, "Door open," the log showed a different notation. 2:34, door switch fault divided by compressor restart. Temp correction. No human whispers. No knocks. As the dock crew began unloading, Jenna noticed thin rime on the inside surfaces of the doors, the kind of frost that forms in cold, closed places. Patterns traced through it, where the rubber seal met metal. Near eye level, faint and already softening as warm warehouse air touched it, were 3 roughly parallel lines. Not words. Not precise. Just 3 smudged strokes, as if someone with numb fingers had dragged them down the frost. Tap, tap, tap. By the time she looked again, they'd blurred into a patch of white like any other. She finished her paperwork, unhooked, and pulled her bobtail around to the staging lot, the hum of dozens of reefers in her ears. That night, when she climbed into a different trailer, newer, cleaner, its unit unscarred by stories, she paused a second longer than usual with her hand on the latch. Metal and freon, she thought, and the things that happen around them. On the road back east, passing a long line of white boxes humming under starless sky, she found herself wondering how many of them carried more than lettuce. How many of them held echoes that rattled along the highways, year after year, heard only by the people awake to listen. Story number 6. The stretch of highway between Ely and the next real town didn't have a name that showed up on maps, but the drivers who ran it at night had a phrase for it. The long empty. Aaron Price guided his rig through it on a moonless autumn night. The world outside his windshield reduced to a narrow band of pavement and the weak glow of reflective markers. Somewhere out in the dark on either side lay high desert scrub, low hills, the occasional crooked fence line. But it might as well have been the surface of another planet. He checked the clock on the dash. 1:42 a.m. The GPS on his mount showed a thin blue line cutting through a wide blank space. Next town, Glen Hollow. Distance, 27 miles. Estimated arrival, 2:18 a.m. His fuel gauge sat just above a quarter, Enough to reach the town and the truck stop his dispatcher had highlighted. Shower, coffee, a few hours of sleep. That was the promise waiting at the end of the blue line. For now, it was just him and the endless dark. The CB hissed quietly on channel 19, more habit than necessity out here. He nudged the volume up, wanting some sound besides the low rumble of the engine. Static, a crackle, then a faraway voice bled through. Anyone else out on 50 tonight, or am I talking to myself again? The signal was weak, rolling in and out like a tide. Aaron picked up the mic. Got you in the weeds, he said. Westbound, about 30 miles past Ely. You on this road too? A short laugh drifted back. Male, older, with the roughness of too many years on the air. Westbound and wondering why I didn't stop earlier, the stranger replied. Handles Tom. You headed for Glen Hollow? Yeah, Aaron said. That's the plan anyway. Tom said, a non-committal sound. Watch your eyes. This road'll make you see things if you let it. Same sagebrush, same hills, mile after mile. Gets into your head. Copy that, Aaron answered. Appreciate the tip. They chatted for a few minutes, weather, freight, the usual filling of empty miles. Tom's voice came and went with the terrain, stronger on the ridges, murkier in the shallow valleys. Then, gradually, it faded back into static. The desert night pressed closer. Aaron passed a hand across his eyes, blinked away the grid of hours. The white line slid by under his headlights, hypnotic. He rolled the window down an inch, letting in air that smelled faintly of dust and cold. A sign floated out of the dark on the right. Glen Hollow 25. Next services, 25. The letters flashed in his beams and vanished. 25, he said under his breath. Easy. He took a sip from his travel mug. The coffee was lukewarm, bitter. It didn't matter. The act of drinking woke him up a little. Minutes passed. He watched the fuel gauge, the tatch, the distant smear of stars at the top of his windshield. The road ahead curved gently through low rises and dips, but never truly changed. Another green sign appeared. Glen Hollow, 25. Next services, 25. Aaron frowned. He glanced at the GPS. Distance remaining, 25 miles. He told himself he'd misread the first sign. Maybe it had said 35. Maybe he'd imagined the numbers. Fatigue played tricks. The dash clock read 1:58 a.m. He drove on. The long empty lived up to its unofficial name. No opposing headlights, no farmhouses with their lonely porch lights. Just the occasional battered reflector post, marking the edge of the pavement. 10 minutes later, another sign swam up out of the dark. Glen Hollow, 25. Next, services, 25. He slowed a fraction without meaning to. The GPS still showed 25 miles to Glen Hollow. The clock on the dash still read 1:58 a.m. Aaron's hands tightened on the wheel. He checked the clock again, more deliberately this time. Watched the digital numbers. 1:58, 1:59, 2. Time was moving. The road was moving. But the distance wasn't. Tom, he said into the CB a little more sharply than before. You still out here? Static hissed, loud in the small cab. Then faint and crackling. Still here, driver. What's biting you? I've passed the same sign for Glen Hollow 3 times, Aaron said. All say 25 miles. GPS says the same. Fuel hasn't moved. Kind of feels like I'm stuck on a treadmill. Tom was quiet for a heartbeat. Yeah, he said at last. You're in it. In what? The loop, Tom answered. Long empties got teeth some nights. You're not the first to hit it. The hairs on the back of Aaron's neck stirred. You saying I'm just driving in circles? He asked. Not exactly, Tom said. More like the road decides you're not ready to let go of where you are or where you've been. So it keeps you in between. Mile markers get stubborn. Signs get forgetful. Some folks don't notice. They just keep singing along with their radio and end up losing an hour they can't place. Others, he trailed off. Others notice too much. Aaron stared ahead. A faint glow appeared on the horizon. A building? Truck stop? As he drew closer, he saw it was a small gas station and diner perched by the roadside. Old, low, with a single canopy over 2 pumps. The sign out front was missing several letters. Valley-View Ga, open 24 hours. Neon in the front window sputtered a dull red, open. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no trucks. Just a flickering soda machine by the door and a stack of plastic crates near the dumpster, catching his headlights. As he passed, he caught a quick glimpse through the diner window. One booth, nearest the glass, was occupied. A man in a plaid shirt sat there, hunched over a coffee cup, face turned toward the road. His expression was unreadable in the flash of light. Then the station fell behind, swallowed by night. The GPS ticked. Distance to Glen Hollow, 25 miles. The clock said 2:07 a.m. Aaron's mouth went dry. "Tom," he said slowly, "you ever see a place called Valley View Gas out here? Square little joint, red sign. Looks like it's been about to close since the 70 seconds. Tom replied. "Yeah, I've seen it." "How many times?" Aaron asked. Tom let out a breath, more sigh than laugh. "Enough." Another sign appeared. Glen Hollow 25. Next, services 25. The letters felt heavier every time he saw them. "What am I supposed to do?" Aaron asked, his voice lower now. "Just keep driving until the road changes its mind?" "For some that works," Tom said. "They put on music, pretend they never noticed, and eventually things snap back. Sign'll say 19 or 17 and they're clear. Others need a little nudge. Something different. Long empty doesn't like sameness much, even as it dishes it out." Ahead, in the distance, Aaron saw the weak glow of a signpost again. This one was different square, with an arrow. Detour. Glen Hollow Alt. Route. 5 miles. An orange sign squatted beneath it. Roadwork ahead. Aaron checked his GPS. No detours displayed. The blue line kept him straight. "You see a detour sign up there?" Tom asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Yeah," Aaron said. "Alternate route. Don't take it," Tom said, the first real edge in his tone. "Road work out here wrapped up years ago. That sign shouldn't be there. Some nights it is." "What's down that way?" Aaron asked. "Don't know," Tom admitted. "Last driver I talked to, who tried it, never made his drop. Got no answer when we tried to raise him. Company put him down as abandoned load. Folks like to say he caught a better job, ran off. Maybe he did." He paused. Maybe the road just found a different way to keep him in between. The detour arrow loomed larger in Aaron's headlights, pointing down a narrow side road that peeled away into thicker darkness. He kept his hand steady on the wheel and rolled past. The arrow slid by his right window and was gone. The GPS still said 25 miles to Glen Hollow. The clock read 2:14 a.m. "Okay," Aaron said quietly. "Not taking the weird detour." "What's the something different you were talking about?" "Depends on the night," Tom replied. "Could be as simple as turning the radio off if you always run it. Could be stopping when you never stop. Road wants you awake to what you're doing, not just drifting." Aaron thought about his habits. He rarely stopped between planned breaks. He almost never killed the radio completely. He liked some noise. "Does anyone ever roll into Glen Hollow without noticing any of this?" he asked. "Just drive straight through like it's nothing?" "Sure," Tom said. "Plenty. The road doesn't snag everyone. Maybe it knows who'll listen, who'll see the seams. You and me, we notice too much." A shape appeared ahead, familiar now. The low, squarish outline of the Valley View station. Same broken sign, same flickering open neon. This time, one of the pumps had a hose hanging loose, nozzle on the ground, as if someone had started fueling and walked away midway. Aaron's hands prickled on the wheel. In the diner window, the man in the plaid shirt still sat in the booth. His coffee cup was closer to his face now. His head tilted just slightly more toward the road, as if tracking something that kept passing by. Aaron drove past without slowing. When the station was out of sight, he reached up and flicked the CB off. Silence slammed into the cab. No static, no Tom. Just engine and tire noise, and the faint rustle of air past the mirrors. He turned the radio off too. No music, no background talk. For the first time in hours, it was just him and the sound of his own breathing. The absence of other noise made the sameness of the long empty stand out in sharp relief. The way the white line slid by. The way the horizon never seemed to move. How smooth his motions had become, almost automatic. He cracked his window down farther. Cold desert air rolled in, smelling of dry earth and distant sage. On the passenger seat sat an old-fashioned paper atlas. He'd thrown it in his bag that morning out of habit, even though his phone and GPS usually did the work. He reached over one hand, fingers brushing the worn cover, and pulled it onto his lap, opening it with a thumb while still watching the road. The pages showed the state in faded colors, highways traced in red, smaller roads in thin black. His route was a straight line. No town called Glen Hollow appeared where the GPS promised one. He slowed a hair and scanned the surrounding area on the map. There was a service road drawn in faint gray, running roughly parallel to the highway for a stretch, connecting a couple of tiny, unlabeled squares, maybe old ranch stops or maintenance yards. The road wasn't marked on his GPS. Ahead, on the real highway, a narrow gravel track branched away to the right, barely wide enough for a truck, marked only by a plain steel gate swung open. No sign, no arrow, just open ground. Every part of his training said don't take unknown roads in the middle of the night. Stay on the route. Stay on the blue line. But the blue line wasn't taking him anywhere. He eased onto the shoulder, checked his mirrors empty, as always, and, heart beating hard, turned the wheel. The crunch of gravel under his tires sounded too loud after the smooth whisper of pavement. The service road ran alongside the main highway for a while, close enough that he could see the white line to his left, the empty strip he'd been stuck on. Then it began to veer gently away, curving behind a low rise dotted with black brush. For the first time in what felt like hours, the angle of the horizon changed. New shapes appeared ahead, rock outcroppings, the faint suggestion of a line of poles. His fuel gauge needle dipped, finally leaving its stubborn place. The dash clock skipped. 2:14 a.m., 2:21 a.m. The air felt different. The night hadn't warmed or cooled, but the pressure of it against the cab lightened, like a held breath finally released. Behind him, the highway ran straight and featureless along the ridge, a strip of dark that now looked as ordinary as any other. He drove the gravel road for 10 minutes, following its bends as it wound between low hills. Twice he had to slow nearly to a crawl to ease over ruts. Once a jackrabbit flashed across his beams, eyes bright. Then, suddenly, the gravel met pavement again. A small, faded sign stood at the junction. Glen Hollow, 2, USA 50 East, divided by West. Aaron turned right, following the arrow for west. Within 2 minutes, he saw it. Real lights, a scatter of buildings around an intersection, a neon sign announcing a diner, the high canopy of a proper truck stop, gas prices glowing in red digits. A blue sign on the shoulder welcomed him. Welcome to Glen Hollow, 11E, 5,230. Pop, 1,204. He almost laughed, the relief so sharp it made his eyes sting. The GPS adjusted itself, blue line snapping neatly onto the new road. Distance to destination, 0.9 miles. He rolled into the truck stop lot and parked among a half a dozen other rigs, all humming softly in the night. When he cut his engine, the quiet roared. Inside the diner, over bad coffee and eggs that tasted better than they probably were, he asked the night waitress if Valley View Gas was nearby. She frowned, thinking. There used to be a place with that name out on the old highway, she said at last. Closed down? Oh, 20 years now? They tore most of it down. Just a slab and some foundation left. Why? Just asking, he said. Back in his cab, full and fighting a yawn, he flipped the CB back on out of habit. Static. Then, after a moment, a familiar, rough-edged voice. You make it through, driver? Tom asked. Aaron smiled tiredly. Yeah. Sitting in Glen Hollow now. Good, Tom said. Remember how you got there. Next time, the road might try something different. You stuck out there tonight? Aaron asked. Tom chuckled softly. Some of us are always out here. Long empty likes company. The channel hummed. Aaron leaned back in his bunk, listening to the distant murmur of other trucks, the low voices on the air, the ordinary creaks and groans of a working rig settling into rest. Before he drifted off, he thought of the man in the booth at Valley View, watching the road. How many nights had he seen the same truck roll by out of sequence? The same driver's face in the windshield, looping, until something changed. Maybe somewhere on that forgotten slab along the old highway, a A cracked window still looked out over a strip of asphalt that wasn't quite straight. And some nights, when the conditions were just right and exhaustion pressed hard enough, the long empty reached a little farther than it should. He slept, and the road rolled on without him for once, content to wait until daylight to show its ordinary face again.